The amazing thing about having a live action version of the Avatar series that not only tells the same story but almost has the same scenes is that we have the rare opportunity to compare these scenes and see how little changes can make a big difference. In case it feels like I'm being a bit harsh on the new Netflix show, know that it's only because I deeply care about this series. In this video we will be focusing on the introduction of the story and its characters, so assuming you've watched episode 1, let's dive in. Part 1. Linear versus non-linear storytelling. The biggest difference in the story introduction of the Netflix series to the original is that the Netflix show chose to tell its story chronologically, whilst the original starts at the Southern Water Tribe with Aang already stuck in the ice, and then we get flashbacks to the time before the war. The Netflix show starts with a little action scene, giving us a glimpse of how Bending will look and feel in this movie. And credit where credit is due, Bending looks so much better than in the Avatar movie. Thank you for that, Netflix. This scene is in so far unique that it is actually completely new. There is no counterpart to this scene in the original, but it sets up the war and the ruthlessness yet cleverness of the Fire Nation quite nicely. So Netflix is starting off strong. After this scene, we meet Aang at the Southern Air Temple. We find out about his childhood, that he's way better at airbending than other kids of his age. We also find out that he's the Avatar.
You are the Avatar.
Yeah, just like that, but more on that later. We found out that his mentor Kyatsu isn't allowed to teach him anymore and that Aang has to learn the 4 elements now to stop the war. It's basically a huge info dump on the audience.
We can't ask this of him. He's powerful, but there's much he still needs to learn. He needs to know who he is.
The role of the Avatar is a heavy responsibility.
Then the Fire Nation attacks and all the airbenders die, who we, the audience, just met, so I'm not sure how we're supposed to feel about that. The scene didn't really move me personally. Aang then gets caught in a storm, emergency freezes himself, and boom, 100-year time jump. It's only now, after over 20 minutes into the episode, that we meet our other 2 protagonists, Katara and Sokka. They get a short introduction and then discover Aang in the iceberg. And this is where the original series started. It starts with Katara and Sokka discovering Aang, and in the course of the episode we find out that he's the last airbender, that he was in the ice for 100 years, and that there's a war. Now, objectively speaking, these are 2 different styles of telling a story, and each style has its advantages and disadvantages. So I would be happy to hear your thoughts on which style you preferred. I personally preferred the non-linear storytelling of the original for 3 reasons. First, the non-linear style creates more mystery. By starting the series with Katara and Sokka, we, the audience, and these 2 characters have kind of the same knowledge about the world. So when they meet Aang in that iceberg, they wonder just as much as we do who he is, how he came there, and what all of this means. And then they want to find all of that out. And at the same time, Aang wants to find out where he is and what the hell happened and why everybody is suddenly so different. And because the audience is wondering the same thing, it creates that connection between the characters and that mystery of wanting to find out more of what all of this means.
Any idea what happened to the Avatar? I knew people that knew him, but I didn't. Sorry.
Second, the linear storytelling style forces the Netflix show to go through a lot of exposition right at the start, because the story the series actually wants to tell is 100 years in the future. But when you want to tell the story in a linear way, you have to start before the war starts, so you have to go through the entire war setup, why the Fire Nation attacks, what the Fire Nation's plans are. You have to set up Aang's childhood, where he grew up, who he is, why he's special. You have to go through all of that exposition, and then you have the action scene, the Fire Nation actually attacks, the war starts, and you have that tension build up, and then you have 100-year time jump, and after 20 minutes into the show, the tension is kind of reset, whereas in the original, you start off more slowly and you can join Aang, Sokka, and Katara kind of in their daily lives, but a bit of exposition about what happened 100 years ago is kind of sprinkled into the episode. And every time you find out another detail, the tension kind of builds up about what all of this means in the long run.
Think about it. The war is a century old. Somehow, you were in there that whole time. It's the only explanation.
And third, I think the non-linear storytelling style of the original makes the world of Avatar easier to grasp. I guess it depends on who you're making the series for. Is it for die-hard Avatar fans or for everybody? I think the action scene at the beginning is great for fans because we already know what bending is and that there's an Avatar and all of that. So we just get an energetic start into the show and see how the bending is going to look and feel in the series, which is great. But for newcomers, I think it will probably feel a bit overwhelming. Whilst in the original we get a slow introduction into bending, and Sokka as a normal person grounds everything in reality. We start seeing Katara influence the water around her, and Sokka calls it water magic. So we don't know if everybody can bend water or if it's just Katara. There are all these questions. And then we see Zuko on the ship bending fire. So it's like, oh wow, there are people that can bend fire. And then they call Aang the Last Airbender. So it's like, oh, there's waterbenders, I guess, firebenders, airbenders. It's a slow introduction, and it kind of builds up, and you kind of learn more about bending as the episode goes on, and you can develop your own feel for it, which is, as I said, at least a lot better for newcomers.
Firebending comes from the breath, not the muscles.
Part 2. The details. Oh, the details. Because the Netflix show and the original share so many of the same scenes, I noticed so many little details that the Netflix show changes that still had a huge impact on the feeling and meaning of the scene. And now I want to share with you my top 4 details. The first detail is that in the original, Aang wakes up in Katara's arms, and in the Netflix show, he wakes up alone. I wonder if the Netflix show did this on purpose or if it just kind of happened, because if they also want to build up that relationship between Aang and Katara, why would you take away that first meeting, that first impression, that first look on Aang's eyes? Doesn't really make sense to me right now.
What is it? Will you go penguin sledding with me?
The next detail, I don't know if I even want to call it a detail because it's a huge change. In the Netflix show, before the Fire Nation attacked the air nomads, Aang didn't really run away. He just wanted to take a short flight to think. And in the original, Aang didn't just want to go on a little flight, he actually ran away. And of course, having Aang run away and then not being there as the Avatar to protect people from the Fire Nation is a huge difference between, oh, he didn't really do anything wrong, it was lucky that he wasn't there, because he didn't really want to run away, he would have come back, so he did nothing wrong. It takes that whole dynamic where later in the Avatar series there's a whole episode where he unveils that he ran away and how much that haunts him. And the Netflix show just took that away, and I don't understand it. If anybody out there knows why they did it, please let me know in the comments below.
Fisherman was right. I did turn my back on the world.
You're being too hard on yourself.
The next little detail I noticed isn't actually one specific scene, but the difference that in a Netflix show, Aang instantly gets confronted for being asleep for 100 years, versus in the original, he learns it bit by bit. People want to confront him, but he always dodges the question with his playful attitude.
100 years ago.
Are you okay? 100 years.
Well, no one has seen an airbender in 100 years. We thought they were extinct.
Check again.
And learning it bit by bit is a lot more engaging and creates mystery. And in the Netflix show, it's just like, okay, there's now a confrontation scene. Aang learns it, and yeah, now he knows. And we know. So it's more like checking a box. Okay, we told that part of the story, instead of implementing that part of the story in an engaging way into the story.
He is the last airbender.
The next little detail that I think makes a big difference is when Zuko attacks the Southern Water Tribe and Aang gives himself up to the Fire Nation to protect the village. There's not a huge difference, but I think it kind of has to do with the same problem that the Avatar movie faced, where they had difficulties of combining action scenes and dialogue. In the original, Aang starts to fight with Zuko, and then whilst they're fighting, he sees that even though he's deflecting the flames and he personally is not in danger, the flames can still hurt other people in the village. So he immediately stops the fight and gives himself up. And in the Netflix show, they first fight, Aang deflects the flames, and then there's some dialogue where Zuko says that he's going to burn down the whole village, and then Aang just kind of walks back into frame and says, no, please, don't hurt anybody, I'll come with you. I mean, I guess the same thing is happening, but it doesn't feel the same. And it's again one of those little details where I ask myself, why did they change this in the Netflix show?
Burn the whole place to the ground.
No!
Now to wrap things up, was Netflix able to capture the magic? At least as far as the introduction goes, for me, it didn't capture the magic of the original. I preferred the non-linear storytelling style of the original, or its slower introduction into the world of Avatar, creating more mystery and having a lot less exposition at the beginning of the show. And all the details they changed, none of them improved the scene for me. Quite on the contrary, the details they changed made the scenes worse for me. So I just wonder, why change details like that if you already have kind of the blueprint of the original? And I get it, you want to make something different. Like, you don't want to just make an exact replica of the original in a live action version, but if you change something, why not change something that makes it better, or at least different, without making it worse? But maybe that's just me, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on the new Netflix show in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.